Okay, here we go. I'm seeing that little meter. I didn't see that before and it had me worried. We're recording this. If you know anybody that wants to see it or listen to it, it will be at my YouTube channel called Light of the Word. If you just search Light of the Word, you'll see my channel come up. This will be here. It's a very relevant study for our day. Recently, in the past 3 weeks, we've seen people turn against a good man in America. And what I want to do today is, the title of this study is called Perpetuals and Parallels. What I want to do in the first part is point out some things that have been common with mankind ever since man has been on the earth. Some things that have existed. For some reason, we believe that the generations before us were better than us. Oh, no. If you read the Bible, that is not the case, folks. Man has been evil ever since man came into existence on the earth. Just go back to Genesis. The first two sons of Adam and Eve were Cain and Abel, and Cain killed Abel because of jealousy. Go back even farther than that. The devil was lifted up in pride in heaven. His name was Lucifer in heaven. His heart became prideful, and he led a rebellion against God in heaven and was cast to the earth along with a third of the angels. So evil has existed from eternity past. We're going to talk about 4 aspects of that in our study. And the next part of the study, here's what I want to do. I want to show some parallels with what happened to Jesus 2,000 years ago and what happened with the recent Supreme Court nominee. Now, he's a Supreme Court justice now, but at the time I wanted to do this study, he was still a nominee. So I want to show some parallels about what happened during Jesus' time, what evil men did toward him, and what evil did against this Supreme Court nominee. And if you watched it, you know that there was some bad things that happened. So first of all, I want to point out some things that will be the same until things change. We are now living in the time from creation until the end of the church age. Now, it's going to change one day when Jesus comes back to earth, but right now, these things are going to remain the same until Jesus comes back. Number 1 is, there is nothing new under the sun. We find that in Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verse 4. There was evil in the world 6,000 years ago, and there is evil in the world 6,000 years later today. Now, what I'm concentrating on in this study is the commonality of evil residing in the hearts of men since the dawn of mankind on the earth. Like I said before, for some reason we think our forefathers were nicer and better than we were. Well, evil has been in the hearts of men ever since man was created. So that's the first thing. And all we have to do is go back in the Bible to see who these groups of people were during the different time periods. During the time period of Noah, by the way, Jesus said it would be like Noah's day and Lot's day when he came back to earth in the last days. Right before Jesus returns, he said it would be like the days of Noah. So let's look back and see what it was. I'm not going to turn there, but if you go back, I am going to turn there. Let's turn to Genesis chapter 6, if you will. And let's look and see how it was during this time period. I'm going to skip to verse 2 and show you the kinds of people that were on the earth then. That the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair. Many Bible scholars believe that these were some of the fallen angels that were cast out of heaven. And they went into the daughters of men, and they took them wives of all which they chose. So these fallen angels that transformed themselves into male figures on the earth, they procreated with women on the earth, and here was the result. Here's the result of what happened. I'm going to skip to verse 4. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, that they bare children to them, and the same became mighty men, which were of old, men of renown. So that tells us they had qualities about them that were very exceeding the normal human capacity. Now there's nothing wrong with that, being smart, but here's what happened. When you couple being smart with evil, then you get a dictator. You get an evil psychopathic person that will destroy himself and millions of people along with him. Look through the recent history. Germany, Russia, China, Mexico, all of these people had narcissistic psychopaths for dictators, and look at the result. Now verse 5, and God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. So all that man thought about 6,000 years ago was evil, and they thought about it all the time. Now when we look around in our world today and we see the television programs that are on, the games that children are playing, and we see what happened in the synagogue yesterday, we know that the same is true today, that evil abounds in our day just like Noah's day. Now, men today, knowledge is increasing once about every 2 years now. It used to be that knowledge doubled about once every 100 years, about 50 years ago. But now knowledge is doubling about every 2 years now. People are smarter than they've ever been, but there's more wickedness in the earth than there's ever been. Now in Jesus' day, the evil people were the Pharisees. We're going to read a lot about them later. And today, some people that I would characterize as put in the evil category would be those that love abortion, of course. By the way, God puts that in that category too in Proverbs chapter 6. Hands that shed innocent blood God hates. So we should hate the things that God hates, shouldn't we? We should hate the shedding of innocent blood, shouldn't we? In our day, it would be the abortion industry. There would be those that are what we call feminazis, that are wanting to eliminate the man from anything in society. The Antifada, MS-13, they're evil. How about Black Lives Matter? The media, they help promote evil. They are biased. I would label Margaret Sanger, the founder of Planned Parenthood as evil, especially when she made the quote that we want to do away with the Negro population. She founded Planned Parenthood, and I would label Planned Parenthood in general an evil organization. Why? Well, if you've been alive for the past 10 years, you've seen the body parts that are sold, the videos that expose them as doing that. You've learned about partial birth abortion and abortion. So in Jesus' day, there were evil people. In Lot's and Noah's day, there were evil people. And in our day, there are still evil people and organizations on the earth. Okay, number one, there was nothing new under the sun. Number two, mankind is not basically good, but mankind is basically evil. Now, in Reformed theology, we refer to this as total depravity. Now, here's what I've heard. When we talk about little bitty toddlers, we always think of them as being innocent, don't we? Well, here's an experiment I would like for you to do sometime. Take two little bitty 1-year-olds and set them face to face and put 3 toys in between them. And it will be illustrated to you in the clearest of terminologies that bad comes into us when we're born. We don't have to teach little ones to be good. To be bad, but we have to teach them to be good. I guarantee you that 90% of the time in that scenario I presented you, that each one of those 1-year-olds will deem those 3 toys to be theirs. It's not yours, it's mine. And if you leave them alone, those little 1-year-olds will be fighting one another over the toys. They will deem them to be theirs. And when the other one reaches for the toy, because of pride in the 1-year-old's heart, they will be thinking, how dare you, that's my toy. So if you doubt whether or not, David said that in sin my mother conceived me. So it is in the human heart, sin and wickedness abides in the human heart. Romans 3. Let's look at Romans 3 to illustrate this. If there's any doubt left as to whether man is basically bad and not basically good. Now, don't get me wrong. We can find good in everybody when we look at people from our perspective. But the standard, when the Bible says there's none good, the Bible is not looking at our standard. The Bible is using God's standard. So we're looking from God's viewpoint in Romans 3. Look what it says here. Right here, verse 10. As it is written, so when it says as it is written in the New Testament, that means there's Old Testament scripture that will back it up. There is none righteous, no, not one. Now remember, this is from God's perspective. There is none that understandeth, there is none that seeketh after God. They are all gone out of the way, and they are together become unprofitable. There is none that doeth good, no, not one. This is the holy indictment against mankind. Now, when we use our standard, which is a human standard, there are some that are good, better, and then there are some that are not. But from God's standard, which is what we use, what we're going to be judged by, there is none good. That's why the good person that went to church every Sunday but never repented and believed of the gospel is going to go to the same lake of fire that the Hitler went to. Because the standard is God's standard. So number 2, perpetual truth. Mankind is not basically good from God's perspective and using His standard. That's very important. But man is basically bad. Okay, number 3, perpetual truth. Evil will always hate good. Now that's very important for Christians to understand. Because sometimes we get in our mind that if we're just good to them, they'll be good back to us. Now, if you try that with a psychopathic serial killer, if you're nice to a psychopathic serial killer, they will immediately see you as an easy target, an easy victim to take advantage of. Evil will take advantage of good-heartedness in a world that has fallen mankind in it. So if we adopt the theory that if we're just good to all these bad people, why, they'll be good back to us, that theory may pan out and it may not. Satan came to hate God, and it didn't just start all of a sudden. First of all, he envied God. Then he was jealous of God. Look at all those people worshiping God. And then he hated God. And he tried to rebel against Him. Cain hated Abel, and he slew him, murdered him. By the way, Cain's blood, that innocent blood that was shed, had a voice that cried out to God, avenge this blood. Innocent blood always cries out for vengeance from God, and God always avenges shed innocent blood. The Pharisees hated Jesus. They became envious. First of all, they tolerated Him somewhat. Then they became envious of Him, and then jealous, and then they hated Him. If you doubt that, read the account of the crucifixion in the 4 Gospels. When they brought Jesus out, beaten to where He was unrecognizable, the normal human being would see that man there and have compassion on him, but not the Pharisees. They cried out the more, crucify Him, and they incited the mob. Have we seen any mobs lately, folks? They incited the mob to have hatred toward Jesus also. The Pharisees incited mob violence 2,000 years ago. We've seen the very same thing in America in recent weeks. People do that. That is straight from Satan himself, and it's pure evil. How many saw those people literally clawing the doors of the Supreme Court? Now, how many of you doubts that if they could have broke those doors down, that they would have not done any physical harm to the nominee? Well, at that time, the Supreme Court choice. If you doubt as to whether, if you say, well, they wouldn't have never hurt nobody, go read the Bible. There was an instance where Paul was in a theater preaching, and they beat him so bad that the Roman army had to come in and rescue him. And the next day when he preached on the balcony, they had to literally carry him up the steps just so he could preach. You can read that in the book of Acts. They got so mad at him one time, they took him out on the outskirts of Lystra and stoned him to death. How do we know they stoned him to death? Well, he went to the third heaven and recalled the events later on. Now, if you are saved and you love the Lord and you love the Bible, here is a negative promise. The world will hate you.
That's right.
How do we know that? Jesus said it in His own words. Turn with me real quick, John 15. We're going to read verses 18 and 19. We get the idea as Christians, if we love the world, well, they'll return the love back to us. That's not what Jesus said. Chapter 15, verses 18 and 19. If the world hate you, ye know that it hated me before it hated you. If you were of the world would love his own. I want to pause a little bit right there. If you know somebody that is a professing Christian and they love the world, the lost people, and the lost people love them, there's a problem. But because you're not of the world, but I have chosen you out of the world, therefore the world hateth you. Remember the word that I said unto you, the servant is not greater than his Lord. If they have persecuted me, they will also persecute you. If they have kept my saying, they will keep yours also. But all these things will they do unto you for my name's sake. Now there's a key word right there. You are hated not because of you in our world today, but because of what you represent, which is what's called absolute truth, the Bible. I'm going to read verse 22. If I had not come and spoken unto them, they had not had sin, but now they have no cloak for their sin. He that hateth me, hateth my Father also. So there's no such thing as the lost world loving a Bible-believing Christian. Emphasis on Bible-believing. If you're a bold Christian and unashamed of your faith in 2018, get ready for the world to not like you. That's just the way it is. So the truths are, really quick. Number one, there's nothing new under the sun. Number two, mankind is not basically good, but basically evil. Number three, evil always hates the good. Now, let's look at the parallels for a few minutes. That we've got. Parallel number one is that Jesus was targeted because of who he associated himself with. Jesus told the truth when he said, I and my Father are one. And when the Pharisees heard that, they said, aha, he's making himself equal with God, which under Jewish law was blasphemy. It's the most awful thing that you could commit as a Jew was blasphemy. And they knew that when they got Jesus to admit that he was equal with the Father, they knew that they had him right then and there. So Jesus was pronounced guilty by who he associated himself with. Go up to 2018. The Supreme Court nominee was found pronounced guilty before proven innocent. In the courts of our land, you're innocent until proven guilty, but the events that we all witnessed showed that a bunch of people pronounced this man guilty before proven innocent. That played out right before our very eyes. Number 2, there were false witnesses brought up against Jesus 2,000 years ago. The Pharisees went out, they put the word out, we want to find somebody that will testify against Jesus. And there were 2 false witnesses that came forward. 2018, our media was an enabling factor in finding false witnesses against this Supreme Court nominee. How do we know they were false witnesses? We know it because we saw it with our very eyes. We saw the events played. We gave the witnesses the benefit of the doubt in America, but it was proven that it was false, just as in Jesus' day. Now remember, all of this is evil in man's heart. That's why all this happened. It happened that way in Jesus' day, and it's still happening today because of one reason: evil still resides in the hearts of men. Number 3, Jesus was acquitted by the law. Remember, Jesus went to Pontius Pilate. Pontius interviewed him. He brought Jesus back out, and what did he say? I find no fault in this man, and he washed his hands. After Jesus was scourged, Pontius interviewed him and declared him not guilty. Now what did that satanic-filled crowd do when they saw Jesus and heard Pilate say, I find no fault in him at all? What did they do? They cried out the more, crucify him. So in their minds, nothing could have happened that would have caused them to change their guilty verdict in their minds to an innocent verdict. Not one thing could have ever happened. They determined beforehand that Jesus was guilty, and nothing that would ever happen would change that. Now, the man that we're talking about was a nominee, but now he's an actual justice. And guess what? In the hearts and minds of many of our fellow citizens, this man is still guilty. He's still guilty. Number 4, Jesus was stigmatized in his day. Stigmatized means that there is a label that is attached to you for the purpose of demeaning your value. There was a stigma that was attached to the Jews decades before Hitler came on the scene. You know what that was? Christ killer. Christ killers. Jesus was stigmatized as being a blasphemer. And once that name stuck, it was there. Every time a certain percentage of the people saw Jesus, he was a blasphemer and worthy of death. Fast forward to 2018. Can anybody remember during this escapade what this Supreme Court nominee was stigmatized as? He was stigmatized, first of all, as a rapist, and second of all, as a chain rapist. And in the eyes of many of our fellow citizens, he will always be that, no matter what the evidence shows contrary to that. So do you see the parallels that has always existed? Evil has always resided in men, and we have seen that evil on display in America these past few weeks. And guess what? If we live we're going to continue seeing it on display. Because man, contrary to what we believe when we dream of a utopia, the Bible does not support that notion. Things will never change until Jesus comes back and physically changes them. You can read about that in 2 Thessalonians 1:8, if you want to write that down. Revelation chapter 19. Zechariah chapters 12, 13, and 14, if you want to read about that. There's going to be a physical something happen before things are going to get better. Jesus said evil men will become or wax worse and worse before He came back, and that is happening. Now, here's the danger of what's recently happened in our country. When we stigmatize an innocent man and label him as a rapist, then we can then, and this is happening in America with a movement right now. There is a movement in America right now in 2018 that is attempting to stigmatize a normal male in America as a potential rapist. What does that mean for you and I that are parents and grandparents? Our children, if the mindset prevails that has this, that men are evil, if that mindset prevails, then our young men in America, our sons and our grandsons, will all be looked at as potential rapists. Now here's the question, do we want that? I don't think we do we? What are we going to do? We need to let our voices be made known. This is one way to do it in this study, is to expose evil for what it is. The Bible in Ephesians 5 says, have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather expose them. Now, how many Christians in the world today are exposing evil for what it is? That's been the purpose of this study right here, to show us some things will never change, and things are going on right now just like they have been for 6,000 years. There are perpetual truths that will never change until Jesus changes them, and because of evil, men will continue to do evil things in our world. Not only in our country, but in every country in the world. So we'll leave it right there.